kinship, ethnicity, and race clearly impact one another, right? We know they're different, but they're not unrelated. So kinship, what I've sort of focused on here is two aspects of kinship, which is descent kinship, so those people in Baradri, lineage, and marriage. We call it alliance. So in anthropology, we have alliance sort of kinship, which is from Levi-Strauss's side, and that structuralism, looking at the bonds between different groups. And we have that kind of descent kinship, which is the sort of father-son, mother-daughter, that sort of descent, depending on whether your lineage is patrilineal, matrilineal, etc. Ethnicity will include kinship, but it's so much more than kinship, because ethnicity would include your language, it would include the kinds of clothing you wear, it would include the food you eat, it would include your religion, might even include your occupation. So ethnicity is a much bigger term. And I think the boundaries of ethnicity are very, very fuzzy. So if we go back to one of the famous anthropologists of Pakistan, Frederick Bart, his analysis of ethnicity and ethnic groups was basically that they are boundary markers. And it's simply a way of saying, I'm in this group and you're in that group. It's not a fixed thing. So the contents inside, Bart says, doesn't matter. So, if I say I wear a particular topi and that makes me a Pathan, well, that topi is kind of irrelevant, except that it signals to other people that I'm a Pathan and I'm not a Chitrali. I'm not a Gilgiti. I'm not a Punjabi. I'm a Pathan because I wear this hat. So the hat, the ethnic marker, is just a boundary. It's a symbol for a boundary. And kinship, I think, is different from that because it's not really marking the boundaries, right? We're not saying I'm a member of this kin group. It's the relations that matter there rather than the symbolic boundaries. Now, race is a minefield. And I think in some ways, we kind of in anthropology, we shied away from it and we started talking about ethnicity because race was just too wrapped up in horrible politics, right? Politics of hatred. But you can't escape race, right? All these people who say, no, I'm colorblind, I'm post-racial. Well, they tend to look like me. They're white people. Black people, I rarely meet a black person who says they're post-racial. I have a Pakistani friend who told me, I assume he was joking. He said he was fed up with being called a colored person, that I am the colored person because in the sun, I turn brown. And sometimes if I'm in too sun, I get too pink. And then if I'm not in the sun, I get really white. I am full of color. He's always one color. He's had enough of this. He's not the person of color and he wants to be post-racial. I'm assuming he's joking, but race is wrapped up in politics. It's very much a sociological phenomenon. And, if you listen to anthropologists like Eric Wolf, it's very much about power politics. That race is, when we invoke race, we are, we're starting to dredge up power relations between groups. In the US, race is very clearly defined around skin color, right? So if you are darker, you are one race. If you are lighter, you're a different race. I was born in Alabama. And on my birth certificate, it tells the race of my parents. So my mother is white, my father is white, which made me white. That's my race, white. Go figure. Seems like an odd race, but we'll run with it. Now, if any of my ancestors had been other than white, if they had been black, then it doesn't matter what my skin color would be. My birth certificate would have said I had a black parent, therefore I would have been black. Because the laws at that time, this law of hypodescent, if you had one drop of quote unquote black blood, you were black. Now, plenty of people who would have been black in that rules passed for white, and then their children become white. So there are many people around the South who will look white and be categorized as white, but by those strict laws of Jim Crow, those segregation laws before the 60s, they would have been classed as black, which meant they couldn't go into certain restaurants. They couldn't sit anywhere they wanted on the bus. There would have been areas of the town they wouldn't have been allowed to live in, jobs they wouldn't get. So race for me is very much about the politics of it. And then I know what you're going to say, Jamshed. You're going to say, but kinship is about politics. You've just written a book called Political Kinship. Yes. So kinship in Pakistan, everywhere you go, as you say, politics is dominated by a small group of people. We're going to call them an elite. But that small group of people, they know each other. They have connections. If you look in the UK, They typically go to Oxford, they do PPE, or they do law. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them have been to one of 5 public schools. They go to places like Eton or Marlborough or Westminster. Our current prime minister went to Winchester. They go to these schools where they meet each other. They learn certain patterns of thinking about economics, about culture, about politics, and that really drives British politics in a way that is not that hard to see. You don't have to be a political scientist to see how important the British public school system is here. And kinship, people always go after biradri politics and how awful they are in biradri politics. And you wrote that wonderful piece in Dawn about protection, about patronage, and having your tribal kind of biradri clan. If you've got the clan, then you actually have some protection against the precarities of the world. And I think that's absolutely right. I think biradri really does matter. But biradri, so I worked in a village where, biradri is very strong. People talk about their biradri, they marry within their biradri, it's a point of pride, all of that. But what I noticed is not all marriages are in biradri, and those marriages that are outside biradri actually turn out to be extraordinarily useful, right? Those are the marriages that when you have a really big shock to the system, those are the people that can help you. Because if you're only ever dealing with the people that you are closely related to, well, you have the same network, right? So if you and I are brothers, you and I know the same people. You get in trouble, I can't go to anyone you don't already know. You can already go to them. Whereas if we're brothers-in-law, we don't have the same circles. If you get in trouble, you come to me, I have a different network of people that I can ask favors for that you don't have access to. So it expands those networks really in an incredible way. And people who just let this happen, okay, they're not politicians, right? That's the way most people are. They rely on these networks to help them out, and they don't necessarily think through which networks they need to be tied into. But in that book, I looked at some families that I think do think about marriage in a very strategic way. So, and I don't want to be horrible about these people because I have nothing but admiration. I think this is the survival strategy when you have a state that is weak, when you have a state that is fluctuating, then you have forces that are beyond the state that can interfere at any time. You have to be ready for really big changes to your system. And so this is, in my mind, this is not something to criticize anyone about. I think the politicians that think, where should I marry my son? I'm going to marry my son into a political family that's in North Punjab. Even though I have no connection to North Punjab, but I want a connection to North Punjab. My other son, I'm going to marry to Mianwali, Niazi. I'm going to marry them down there because that's a political family I want to be connected to. And then I'm going to marry another one into the, sort of Okada area because that's an important area that I want to have some connection. And maybe, so you see Punjabi families tend to marry Punjab and KP. Sindhi families, it's Sindh and Balochistan. So you see why some of these rifts occur within the country because people aren't marrying each other across these very much. So what we need is for Bilawal to marry, one of Nawaz Sharif's relatives. And we create our little Wata Sata exchange and we make everyone happy, right? It's not going to happen, right? I'm absolutely not going to predict that at all. But that's the sort of thing that people use on the ground in villages to stop blood feud, to heal rifts. They use marriage strategically. So the premise of the book is, if they're doing this in villages, is it possible that people like Nawaz Sharif or Chaudhry Shajat or Parvez Elahi, that they are also thinking about marriage in this way? We're all praying for Imran Khan's speedy recovery, but his marriages, did he think strategically about his marriage, or was that just pure love? I mean, and I would never cast aspersions at all, but there's no doubt that marriage, his third marriage, has been very beneficial, right? This has tapped him into a very effective, politically powerful family that, has I'm sure benefited. And I stress, I am in no way criticizing anyone for doing this, because if I were born into these families, if I had my children marry who they want to marry because it's very little consequence to my household. But if my household could collapse on the strength of a bad marriage, then I guarantee you I would be controlling the marriages of my children very, very carefully. So I don't criticize people for this. I simply recognize that there is a political consequence. They may well be marrying for love, but there is a political consequence for the marriage choices they have.
Even for the parties like Jamaat Islami and MKM, those are non-dynastic parties, but still at the very deeper level, they have to follow it. So
just add one thing. I think that's absolutely right. But one of the things that kinship offers is a non-confrontational opportunity to meet people. So you can meet people at janaza, at shadi, at various family functions. That's not ostensibly political, right? You know, you're not going there to talk politics. You're going there to honor some family event, but you do wind up meeting people who will be on the other side. Now, at the level of the Shehbaz Sharifs and the Imran Khans, I don't know. I don't get invited to those weddings. But at the level of lower landlords, that absolutely happens, right? So I go to weddings in northern Punjab, and you see that there will be people from all the parties there, and they're there because they have a kinship connection, they have a family connection, household connection. And so while they're there, actually, they, you know, if they're big shots and they're well known, they won't sit next to each other, but you can see people running back and forth between them. You can see that if they want to talk to each other, this is an opportunity to just exchange some non-hostile messages. They can do it outside of the kind of focus of the camera, outside of the focus of social media. You know, they can have a civil conversation without the glare of all that scrutiny that comes with politics, because you're at a non-threatening event.